I'm exactly what a serial killer looks like. I'm exactly what a sex offender looks like. It can be anybody.
Someone that's killed 87 people, I definitely got a screw loose someplace, or there was not a place to put the screw.
Everybody has the capability of murdering somebody. You and I, anybody can kill somebody else. What does it take to pull a trigger on a gun? Anybody could do it, but few people have the capacity to kill. And the capacity to kill is not only being able to pull a trigger, but being able actually to do it and to live with it. You see, serial killers are people who can kill and sleep well at night.
I'm Richard Roth. What you are about to see is sometimes graphic and often disturbing, a difficult subject to talk about. We'll ask the experts and the killers themselves some hard questions about murder by number. Who are these serial murderers? How do they choose their victims? Are there common traits, biological or psychological? The number of serial murders is low, but their impact is like that of other unlikely tragedies, a plane crash, a bolt of lightning, unexpected and frightening.
She was found not far away about an hour later, beaten and strangled to death.
And we have charged him with 9 counts of first-degree murder.
A confession to the killings of 7 middle-aged men along interstate highways in Central Florida.
Far beyond what the numbers justify, we are fascinated by and fearful of serial murderers and the dreadful crimes they commit.
It was just a horrible odor. It was terrible.
Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys and turned his apartment into a house of horror where he hoarded bodies and body parts.
They tried and failed and created a Holocaust.
Andrei Chikatilo, a grandfather, convicted in Russia of murdering 52 women and children. John Wayne Gacy, found guilty of murdering 33 young men. Donald Harvey, who was convicted of killing 37, but who claims he killed 87, mostly hospital patients. Arthur Shawcross murdered 2 young children, got out of jail, and went on to kill 11 women.
Our definition of a serial killer is someone who has 3 or more victims, murders 3 or more victims, with a cooling off period in between each of the homicides.
A serial killer is not the same as a mass murderer. Unlike George Hennard, who shot dead 22 people in a Killeen, Texas cafeteria and then turned the gun on himself, a serial killer does not kill his victims all at once and rarely commit suicide. Among experts, there is basic agreement on the definition of a serial killer, but not necessarily who they are.
Well, it is a white male phenomenon. It's a primarily U.S. white male, mid-20s to mid-30s.
What are the myths of the serial killing industry?
That they are white males. We have black males that kill. We have white females that are serial killers. I think the reality is that they are more like us than we like to admit.
I did enjoy playing the jury, the judge, and the prosecutor and executioner.
I still have murderous instincts, or whatever you want to call it. At times, I still want to kill.
He appeared to be a calm, neatly dressed, clean-shaven.
What these people are doing is murder. It's plain, simple, gory, awful, terrible murder of more than one form at a time. It's not one gunshot. It's strangling, it's stabbing, it's mutilation. It's all of those things combined.
There's no magic about being a serial killer. There's nothing that they're all powerful and they're mystical. These are human beings. These are people who have very serious, fatal flaws about them.
I think the society has a difficulty understanding and putting a person like a serial killer into a framework. I mean, it just is something outside of the imaginative capabilities of the ordinary individual.
I never killed patients that were mine. I'd always kill patients that were someone else's.
So I held my grip on his throat for a few more seconds to make sure he was dead. Then I decided, well, maybe I'll revive him and do it again.
Serial killers can be found all over the world, but scholars say the greatest numbers are in the United States.
No other nation on earth produces anything remotely resembling the proportion of serial killers that does America.
Particularly the extreme cases with 8, 10, 20 murders tend to happen in certain states within the United States. Serial murder is not a national problem in the US. It is very much a Western and to a lesser extent a Southern problem.
No other nation on earth comes close, although every nation produces them, but no other nation comes close in the rate of production. So the question then is why? Why should it be so?
You're going to do everything I tell you to do.
Does the United States harbor more killers or simply provide more victims and the opportunity to get away with it?
The United States doesn't have more potential killers, it has more potential victims in a much more mobile society, much more transient society, far looser social links than other countries.
We've always had serial killing. It's not something that just happened back in 1975.
Because this right here is what this case is all about.
Serial killing may appear to be a late 20th century phenomenon, but many experts say it's nothing new. Serial murder may be the source of the vampire lore.
In the Middle Ages, there were a number of circumstances of royalty in Yugoslavia and Holland and various locations in Germany where people in royalty, bored and indulged people, were actually victimizing people from the village. They went to the castle and were never seen to return.
The reason we feel more comfortable in saying this must be the work of a madman is the same as the reason that the villagers in Transylvania, which really did exist, were more comfortable saying that this mutilated body by the roadside that had human footprints nearby must have been the work of a vampire or a werewolf. It has to be a man-beast because people like you and me couldn't do this.
These are not werewolves. These are not monsters stalking at night. These are people who, in many ways, appear very, very normal, and that's what's unsettling, I think, about the phenomena.
The most infamous historical serial killer terrorized London in the 1800s. Jack the Ripper killed only 5 people and was never caught, yet his deeds became legendary.
I call Jack the Ripper the father of the age of sex crime. He's our new founding father, in a way. And his crimes originated a pattern.
If you look at the years between 1900 and 1940, there was probably as much or almost as much serial murder activity in the United States back then as there is today. That rate then declines in the middle years of the century, in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s, and then rises again in the 70s and 80s.
I'm not going to say I'll get out of here and never do it again because I don't know.
Control did come into play. The idea of being able to make another human being do absolutely anything I wanted them to do.
Serial killings are not at the top of the list as a social problem. However, they do capture the public imagination because the risk seems so uncontrollable to most people.
It's not difficult to understand how one individual can become sufficiently disturbed or aggressive to wish to kill and to kill repeatedly. The big question is, what permits them to kill 5 or 10 people before they stop?
So, how many serial killers are there? How many people die at the hands of serial killers each year? The answer? Far fewer than you would think. Far fewer even than the FBI says. A CNN investigation uncovered why. In a 1983 letter to a Senate subcommittee, FBI Director William Webster pointed to the growing numbers of unsolved murder cases as evidence of the work of serial killers. Crime writer Ann Rule also testified, using Webster's raw numbers to warn of a serial killer threat to society.
Isn't it true that you at one point stated that there were thousands of deaths as a result of the serial killers at work, perhaps as many as 5,000?
Yes, I think so. At that time, I remember, let's see, this would be in about 81. I think there were 25,000 homicides in America. And as many as almost 20% of those were stranger-to-stranger homicides.
It's such a rare phenomenon that to say that we have 5,000 victims a year is, where are all these victims? There's no empirical research to support that at all.
That estimate of 5,000 deaths a year became the basis for funding an elite unit at the FBI Academy in Quantico to study and analyze serial murder.
We had this ludicrous figure of 4,000 to 5,000 serial murder victims each year. The figure then entered the literature, and some people wrote books saying that there are 4,000 to 5,000 serial murderers active at any given time, which is absolute nonsense.
Some people want to make more of an issue out of something, so naturally, over time, that 5,000 murders, unsolved murders, that they have relegated to the serial killer ranks has taken on a life of its own. And so now, after 10 years of believing it and doing it, we really believe it today, which is not accurate at all.
Critics have said that you and others, by backing the 5,000 figure, helped spread a panic.
No, I don't think so. And well, there's always been the choice for me. Do you frighten people and maybe save their lives, or do you cover it over and we all put our heads in the sand, and then if the moment comes when you need to be prepared and you aren't, what is the choice? I have always chosen to err on the side that may save lives.
The FBI Behavioral Sciences and Investigative Support Units keep track of serial murderers. According to the official summary, since 1977, there have been 331 serial murderers and nearly 2,000 confirmed victims. But an independent examination of the FBI supporting data commissioned by CNN Special Reports shows a much different picture. After removing duplicated cases, the total number of serial killers listed in the FBI's own supporting data is only 175 cases. After adding in serial murderers missing from the FBI data, the total number of known serial killers since 1977 is only 191. The actual number of confirmed victims just 1,007, slightly more than half the number of victims the FBI has claimed until now. The FBI admits that the data may not be completely accurate, mostly because of the way it is gathered, from newspaper and wire service reports, not official crime statistics.
Very squishy. Very unreliable numbers. It's hard for anybody to come up with adequate numbers.
And even FBI agents debate how many active serial murderers there are killing at any given time.
You hear all kinds of numbers, and I would certainly say 25, 35, or 40 serial killers active at any given time is not out of the ballpark.
My feeling now is probably in this 50 to 100 range if we're talking people who have killed 3 or more times with a cooling off period in between. Probably active, identified, out there right now, probably 50 to 100 people in society.
Where are they? Where are they? If we know that there are 50 or 100, why haven't we caught them? What have we learned from these people over the past 18 or 20 years?
Suppose a murder victim is discovered in your community, then another, and another. For police, the challenge is to find the similarities and style and motive that say this is the work of a serial killer, before the killer kills again.
got it? Yeah.
They don't go back into the files often. Perhaps for court appeals or the occasional inquiring visitor, these Hillsborough County, Florida lawmen will show the horrifying evidence left behind.
These are the body dump sites throughout Hillsborough County.
This is the gruesome trail of the hunt for a serial killer.
Just looking at the pictures, you can relive each crime scene as you found it. You can still smell the bodies.
Captain Gary Terry remembers the names and faces as if it were yesterday. 10 women abducted, raped, and then murdered by a serial killer. 1984, the Tampa Bay area. Bodies of young women start turning up. The first one, Lana Long, found nude with a noose around her neck. Her legs grotesquely spread 5 feet apart.
I think myself, the first day, the captain and I stood down there with Lana Long on Mother's Day, I believe it was, May of '84, and saw how this girl was so displayed. I'd never seen anything like it. And I really think we both thought that we had something unique then.
Unique enough that Captain Terry and his sheriff's department sent all evidence found at the body dump site to the FBI in Washington for analysis. It was a decision that would quickly pay off.
Initially, we were looking for trace evidence, and we found it. We were very lucky. We found some carpet fibers from the very first case. So we knew what we were looking for. From that time on, I was looking for that same type of evidence.
Specifically, it was a red trilobal nylon fiber, either from a car or a house. 2 weeks later, another body. Michelle Sims, also bound.
Then at the second homicide scene, they also discovered red trilobal nylon carpet fiber. So immediately, not only do we have the gut feeling that these cases are related, now we've got physical evidence, trace evidence by the FBI laboratory that says you in fact had these cases linked through fiber evidence. And that was crucial.
The fiber was a common thread, so were tire tracks preserved at the scene and the types of knots used to bind and strangle the women.
That's the ligature that was used on her legs.
The list of victims kept growing. Police focused on the killer's targets. Many of the victims were last seen on Nebraska Avenue, known around Tampa Bay as the Strip. Police say he was after women who were most vulnerable: prostitutes, exotic dancers, hitchhikers. He'd offer several of the women $30 for sex or a lift home, anything to get them in his car.
And the pressure keeps building. It's like you go home at night and you just sit there and you lay awake at night and think, what did I do today? What didn't I do? Should we have done this? How about this other? How about if we try this person? Can we interview this other person over here? And then you sit at home and all your waking days you're looking at the telephone waiting for it to ring. Every homicide scene. Yeah.
And it did ring for Virginia Johnson and Kim Swan. Again, those same red carpet fibers were found. 8 women were now known dead. The frustration was intense.
And it's really difficult to try to explain to someone that wasn't there to smell the body after been decaying for 2 or 3 days. Look at the ground where this victim had ground her hands in the ground, scratching. She's been strangled to death. And this victim is sitting astride of her while she's stripped nude and he's raping her as he's choking her to death.
While much of the city sleeps, hundreds of extra police officers and decoys are assigned to major streets and highways. And then the big break.
And I'm just on the way home and happy as can be. I'm humming along to a song that I listened to on the radio that evening.
Lisa McVeigh was 17 years old at the time. She was riding home on her bicycle at 2:30 in the morning from her job at a donut store. She noticed a strange van parked at a corner.
And I was going by the van, and a person jumped out from front of the van and grabbed me off my bike, took me around my neck. I'm breathing hard, I'm screaming, you know, oh my God, why is this happening to me? He had a gun. He threatened to kill me if I didn't stop screaming. And I said, fine. I asked one thing, just spare my life. I'll do anything you want me to, spare my life.
Incredibly, McVeigh was on her way back home to a horrible family life. A victim of sexual abuse for years, the teenager decided to use survival skills from that experience to cope with the man with the gun.
I said to myself, I've got to survive this. Some way, somehow, if the police find me dead, I had to think of a way to leave clues behind, to let them know that I tried.
The killer drove McVeigh to an apartment.
He raped me repeatedly. I can even give you a number count of 7 times at least. Was no picnic, of course. It was very hard for me to go through that. But then again, I couldn't fight, I couldn't struggle, because I was afraid it would jeopardize me and get me killed.
McVeigh was in the apartment for 36 hours.
He tried to feed me a sandwich and a Coke. And I just started crying. I couldn't eat because I was afraid maybe he has put poison into it. I said, no, I cannot. I started crying. He goes, please don't cry because then I'm going to have to cover your mouth up again. And I remember in the background the TV was on. And the reason why I remember what was on, because I used to love watching a show which was called Airwolf. And then a news break came on saying there had been a girl kidnapped and she'd been missing, and he turned it off real quick. He goes, you don't need to hear that. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't need to hear it, but it's because I'm here. I'm living it.
Then McVeigh was told to get dressed.
I just tightened my jaw as tight as I could get it to where the blindfold would be loose on me. So when I was, of course, laying back at an angle, and I could see things underneath the blindfold. And I noticed he stopped at a gas station. I do not know, what the name of it was. I didn't get that far. I knew it was a bank. I did get to try and look around the bank, and I heard the sound from tapping on buttons. I did get to see 2 hotels, which was a Quality Inn and a Howard's Johnson. And right there and then tell me what area I was in. That helped tremendously. Because right before we got on the interstate, I knew what area I was exactly in so I can tell the police where I was. I even identified his car. I kept seeing a light shining in my eyes, like something reflecting off. It was hurting my eyes. I said, well, maybe it's the make of the car, or the name of the car. And I kept sitting there waiting to see the word just right, in a right angle. And when I did, it surprised me because it said Magnum. And the first thing that came to mind was Magnum PI, because that was one of my favorite shows too. And that way I can remember the kind of car he had to help the police out. He told me to get out of the car. He said I had 5 minutes to stand there. And 5 minutes, your whole life flashes in front of you. When you're a little child, up until then. I said, this is it. He's going to kill me. And of course, no one can see me, and I turned around and he was gone. I ran to the street to see if he was around, if I could see him, and I couldn't see him. And I just fell to the ground.
Meanwhile, police had been searching for clues in unrelated cases.
Mike Malone called down from the FBI laboratory and said, we've got a match on the fiber evidence out of a rape victim out of the city of Tampa, and she was released alive.
What we knew was the guy that abducted and kidnapped Lisa McVeigh killed all these other girls. We just didn't know who that guy was, and Lisa provided the vital information.
Proof that he used this automatic bank machine, that the red fibers came from the carpets in his car, and that he drove a red Dodge Magnum.
We pulled all those resources together. We sent teams of detectives out in northeastern Hillsborough County, began searching that area for this vehicle description that she was able to give to us. One of these teams is going up Nebraska Avenue. He's going up Nebraska Avenue. He sees a car matching the description, and the car is stopped. This driver is identified as Bobby Joe Long. He's photographed. Then he's allowed to leave because we didn't have enough to hold him.
Surveillance of the suspect begins. He is seen cleaning and vacuuming out his car, which had an exact tire match to crime scene tire prints. Lisa McVeigh identifies his photo, and Long is arrested.
Mr. Long is interviewed. Initially, he denies it, and then he confesses to the kidnapping, abduction of Lisa McVeigh. And then he's interviewed about the homicides, and he ultimately confesses to the homicides of these women here in the Tampa Bay area.
The task force announced the arrest of Long at 11 o'clock this evening. They announced about 9:15 that they had arrest, and here he is, 31-year-old Robert J. Long, charged with 9 counts of first-degree murder. Sheriff Heinrich told me moments ago that Long is edgy, that the impact of what has happened to him has just hit him.
The police uncovered other chilling details about Bobby Joe Long inside his apartment. Photographs taken while he was raping his victims in the car. He also stocked his home with trophies, wall hangings, jewelry, and even a wine decanter taken from the dozens of women he is believed to have raped and attacked across Florida before and during his murder run, as he escalated to serial killing.
Charged with 9 counts of first-degree murder.
This woman's attack case was one of many solved with Long's arrest.
I didn't even think he was a criminal when I first opened the door and saw him. He looked like a very ordinary, he looked like my own son would look, to tell you the truth. Would I say he was a serial killer? I'll tell you right now that he was a very intensely disturbed man with a lot of rage and violence hidden just by the way he'd clench his teeth and just kept saying, "Shut up, I'm going to have to hurt you," very quietly.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say.
In a 1986 television interview, which subsequently became state evidence against Long, he explained his serial killings of women.
When I saw him walking down the street, it was like A, B, C, D. I pull over, they get in, I drive a little ways, stop, pull a knife, a gun, whatever, tie him up, take him out, and that would be it. And they all went exactly the same way until McVeigh came along.
You know, why did he have to kill him? Why am I alive? There's so many questions. I was actually starting to feel guilty. Why me? Why did I deserve to live?
She didn't fit. He'll talk about her and the crimes, that it wasn't right. Something wasn't right. He can't describe it. He can talk about a feeling. He can describe some type of whatever it was, but it was not a thought about, oh, I can't kill this person. She just didn't fit.
She was different. The whole thing was different. That whole episode was different. See, that's when it really became clear to me that I was losing control.
I think what happens is after a certain number of offenses, the offender is inclined to feel omnipotent and as though nothing can bring him down because nothing has so far, and that they get sloppy at that stage. Also, it's frightening to them to have as much power as they do.
He was on a roll toward the end of his little reign of terror. He was doing about 1 a week, so that if we hadn't have caught him when we did, he might have set all kinds of serial murder records, who knows.
Long was ultimately convicted of 10 counts of murder.
Bobby Joe Long is, I think, a good example in terms of the investigation of what a serial murder investigation should be. At least it's an excellent example of cooperation between local law enforcement and the federal authorities.
Several things worked. One thing, the key thing was recognition. The fact that we recognized early on in the series that we've got a problem.
It worked because the police agencies were talking to each other. In other words, there was no territorial disputes. They would ask one of the others to send in a case to us, and we would look at it. There was no problems at all. They were totally cooperating, and if they hadn't had this cooperation, I don't think Bobby would be in jail today.
A majority of the jury, by a vote of 12-0, advised and recommended to the court that it impose the death penalty upon Robert Joe Long.
Bobby Joe Long is on death row. While rejecting a request for an interview, the serial killer expressed concern that the state of Florida wants to electrocute him.
You know, now he's sitting there and he's worrying. He deserves it. He deserves to sit there and sweat and go through what he put them through. Am I going to die? As far as me, am I going to die? And it's a good feeling for me because he's getting a little taste of what he put us through. And that's good for him.
Do you want him to die?
Yes, I do. Very much. I want to be there when they pull the switch. Because I want to make sure that he's gone.
Any reaction, Bobby Joe?
Tell the jurors they shouldn't have been so upset.
If the Bobby Joe Long case is a classic example of how a serial killer should be caught, good police work, lots of cooperation, and a little bit of luck, then what started on the banks of the Green River, south of Seattle, is the best example of how bickering, mistakes, and politics helped a serial killer elude capture. Today, the Green River is part of the scenic beauty of the Pacific Northwest. But a decade ago, the Green River ran red. Bodies of women were found in the river and on its banks. A small task force was formed to solve the case, but the nightmare of the Green River was just beginning.
Well, essentially, the Green River case is an example of how many things can go wrong in an investigation. It began in the summer of 1982 with 5 young ladies found in the Green River, and they made their first major mistake soon after. When they found no more bodies in the river, they assumed that the killer had left or that he had stopped killing, and that was mistake number 1.
In the beginning, the 25-member task force didn't have much to go on. They focused on the backgrounds of the dead women. There was a link.
A lot of the victims were working as prostitutes out there. We've also determined that some of those that have been reported missing were also working as prostitutes out there.
But in a way, that information hurt progress in the probe. Despite police calls for a wider investigation, some city officials and community residents felt little sympathy.
Basically, the victims, to some people, are not very important. They're basically throwaways, quote unquote. So I believe that they decided not to expand as much energy as they could have.
No more bodies turned up, so after a year, the task force was wound down, eventually to just 1 investigator.
Any blind man could see that this was not just a one-time occurrence in the Green River, that it would continue if you didn't do something.
Everything quieted down, and it was like it never happened. The media went on to other stories. Police went on to other cases, burglaries, robberies, whatever. The politicians basically had something else to do. So everybody relaxed.
Everybody except the killer, who did most of his stranglings while the police were closing up shop. He just started dumping the bodies in new locations, often in thick woods. In all, the Green River killer murdered at least 49 young women, 5 a month at some points during his run from 1982 until 1984. They were all either prostitutes, hitchhikers, or runaways. Many met the killer in broad daylight along what is known as the SeaTac Strip.
You can just sense that he was stalking. You look at the strip, it's full of businesses, there are parking lots, there are shopping centers, there are bus stops, and you can just feel that he sat there and watched the prostitutes, and when there was one that was sitting alone, and there weren't very many cars coming, he just would swing in there, pick her up, and once she was in his comfort zone, the door's locked, and that's it.
In late 1983, hunters start coming across body after body. A new and much larger task force is formed.
Basically, what the task force did for the first year and a half that it was formed was run from one body recovery site to another.
They did a fantastic job when they formed the task force, but the trail was so cold that they couldn't find the person. And they essentially were buried. The Green River killer inundated police with victims and with paperwork.
How close are you to finding the killer?
It's really difficult to say. I don't think we can tell you that. When I first became a member of the task force, I fully believed that we would solve the crime within 6 months of being assigned there.
What happened?
Well, after 6 months of being assigned, it was a much larger task than I had ever envisioned.
There was little to go on at the crime scenes, usually just skeletal remains. And back on the Strip, police were sometimes unable to learn anything about a victim.
In many cases, we didn't learn that the person was even missing until weeks, months, sometimes years later. And that made the resolution of this case very difficult.
So you come down to the early 90s, they haven't solved it. It's become a political liability because they went after the wrong man at one time. So the county executive decides, we're going to cut it back, no more funds, we're throwing in the towel.
The trail had gone cold. Millions of dollars spent unsuccessfully to find the Green River Killer. Political leaders had had enough. The task force was disbanded.
I think what we really learned was that the task of resolving a very complex serial murder can be a horrendous task.
Critics pointed to police department politics. Many victims were from Seattle, but their bodies were discovered in surrounding King County. Cooperation was strained.
Law enforcement agencies work terrible together. And that's part of the reason why this case was not solved.
The Green River Task Force is like the Seattle Mariners, who are now 25 games below 500 on the season. And those of us who like the Mariners will tell you, in addition to everything else, they've had abominable luck. Abominable luck. They get more bad bounces and more bad hops and more balls lost in the light. That to me is the story of the Green River Task Force. They just had abominable luck. Nothing went their way.
The police were very unlucky in this particular case. I wouldn't give the killer any credit whatsoever.
Huge rewards and thousands of tips failed to produce the name of the Green River Killer.
Where is this guy? What do these guys go off to serial killer in heaven? I mean, where do these guys go?
Criminology professor Eric Hickey has studied serial murder for more than a decade.
Like the Green River case, I think he's either dead or he's in prison for something else. He could be doing it somewhere else. But in terms of him retiring from serial killing, no. I think that once a serial killer, always a serial killer.
I would venture to guess, since I live in the south end of King County, that I have at one time, maybe more than one time, sat in a restaurant in a booth next to the Green River Killer, maybe stood behind him in the Safeway line at the grocery store, and never saw anything the least bit aberrant.
It's been a long 10 years. I still regret that we were unable to solve these crimes at the very inception.
The quest for the Green River Killer is now down to the efforts of just 2 detectives.
One of the big lessons to be learned in the Green River case is that we could get another serial killer in here, in New York, Chicago, Boston, wherever, and law enforcement probably will not catch him. Partly because they keep repeating their mistakes. Partly because of jurisdictional jealousies.
You got 49 murder victims out there. That's not happened anywhere in the history of the United States at one time in one location. I don't think it's a very good sign of faith on the part of the public and its police department or in law enforcement in general in the region to all of a sudden quit a case like that.
Well, I wanted to see it solved. And I think that every investigator that worked there wanted to see it solved. Maybe that wasn't possible.
In the last few years, there have been similar murders along the west coast of the United States, bodies of women dumped in rural areas. But the police say too much time has passed. It's not the work of the Green River Killer.
I think that unless the offender chooses to admit to the crimes, that case will never be solved. Not in this life.
One of the most perplexing problems facing law enforcement is how to tie murders together. Details from one murder scene, when combined with evidence from another, might provide enough information to find the killer. But what if the 2 killings are in different police jurisdictions, the next county, the next state? The investigators may never know about the other case. A decade ago, the FBI set out to solve that problem, but But so far, the results have been disappointing.
People that have been murdered over the past 5 days.
There are signs that significant progress is being made.
Looking at 8 possible suspects in our series of homicides.
Serial killers can be tough to find.
I mean, how do you catch the guy? That's really the issue. These people are individuals who tend to be fairly bright, who know the system, who enjoy taunting law enforcement.
Mr. Long, what do you have to say?
Killers like Bobby Joe Long aren't afraid of local task forces.
You know, I knew all I had to do was throw my stuff in a car and move to Lakeland or Miami or Daytona or out of state, and they'd never track me down. You know, there's no way.
So the typical homicide is not very difficult to solve if you know who the victim is, by simply a process of elimination. The problem is, when you have this relationshipless homicide, where do you start?
Not only do they often murder strangers, the serial killers don't always strike the same way. Los Angeles homicide detective Frank Salerno saw that in his hunt for the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez.
He killed in just about every manner known, except poisoning. I mean, he used guns, he used knives, he stomped a woman to death with a shod foot, he cut throats, he stabbed, he strangled with his hands, he strangled with a ligature, he used a tire tool. So if you were just going to go by traditional methods of connecting cases, like you would bank robberies or burglaries, you'd never connect a guy like Richard Ramirez.
The movements of perhaps America's most renowned traveling killer, Ted Bundy, show how serial murderers can avoid capture. Bundy began killing in Washington state, murdering 10 women there, 2 in Idaho, 1 in Oregon, 8 in Utah, 3 in Colorado, escaped from jail, then headed to Florida, where he murdered 3 more women. Despite the shocking number of deaths and disappearances, it was not until late in his killing spree that authorities were able to link the cases.
One of the big problems you have with serial murder cases is connecting or discovering when you have a serial going.
After Bundy was captured, there was a move to make sure another Bundy could be caught before he killed so far and wide. One witness before a Senate committee was Ann Rule, now a crime writer, but in the late 1970s, an unsuspecting friend of Ted Bundy.
We realized that if you lost your boat or your car, there was a central information spot where you could see if anybody had found it. But if you lost your child or your spouse, there was no place, central clearinghouse.
Congress ultimately funded a computer system called VICAP, short for the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. VICAP was intended to catch serial killers through law enforcement communication.
That's what the VICAP program is trying to do, is to capture all this data, both solved and unsolved crimes, get it in here, compare it, begin to make the linkages, and see if we can't begin to identify these offenders and then move more swiftly to stop them.
The federal VICAP operation looks impressive, but the results are less so.
If you're to rate them over, the 8 years that they've been in operation, I don't know of a case that they've connected.
I'm disappointed. I think it can work. I think that it's taken a lot longer than I thought it would when we worked so hard on it.
The reason? VICAP is not getting fed enough information.
The problem is a lot of police officers, a lot of police agencies do not use the system. The technology is there, they're not using it.
And my personal belief is that until participation is mandatory in VICAP, that we're not going to see maximum efficiency.
And VICAP managers know they aren't getting the full picture.
We have about 7,000 cases in the system now. If we were receiving all the unsolved murders that were occurring in the United States, with 6 years of experience, we would have about 35,000 reports in the system.
You've got too many forms. That's a problem. There are too many forms.
The big complaint police have with the FBI's VICAP operation, especially in its early days, paperwork. The original version for local police had 3 volumes.
I don't think we need any more forms. That isn't the solution to these crimes, I guarantee you.
What are they telling us they're tired of doing law enforcement work? It's ridiculous. It's a poor excuse. They ought to get out of law enforcement. They ought to throw in their badges.
Even though the VICAP form has been slimmed down, a more intractable problem remains.
If somebody kills in one jurisdiction and goes to another jurisdiction, and we don't have communication between those jurisdictions, which is very often the case, then we may not know we have a serial killer.
Even after a suspected murderer is caught, police departments don't like to pool information with the feds or anyone else.
Their case is made, and they've got the solution to their crime. What we have to do is make them aware that this guy may have done others.
To me, serial murder is a symptom of a much larger phenomenon. That being linkage blindness, this term that I use to describe the problem of sharing information across jurisdictions. Serial killer takes advantage of that.
It's a huge problem. I mean, I was in a major jurisdiction not long ago. I mean, a major jurisdiction. I mean, you got thousands of police officers on a department. I said, you know, you folks in the county need to talk to you folks in the city and vice versa, and you should have heard this. Boo, you know, because they don't like to communicate.
Politics come into play in serial murder investigations. There's no two ways about it. Serial murder and the investigation of serial murders becomes political in nature. You've got the natural rivalries between agencies. Who's going to catch them first?
Mary 144 and 3 better addresses.
Cities and towns are often reluctant to do what's necessary to catch serial killers.
We just are not prepared to be able to go out on a systematic basis from day to day and investigate killers like this.
VICAP tells us we do have a serial killer in the area. That's great. So what do you do about it? You still got to catch him. And that's the hard part.
A few states have done something. They've begun their own FBI VICAP-style system, which requires local communities to share data. Bob Keppel developed the state of Washington's HIT system, which provides crime data to VICAP.
I can say rather confidently that 100% of the eligible cases for VICAP are submitted from the state of Washington.
All technological weapons will be needed to catch skilled serial murderers. And if a police force decides not to play,
they're really going to be at a very big disadvantage, because it's like trying to get into the 20th century technology using maybe 18th century techniques. You're just going to be left behind.
it's not enough for us to merely be fascinated with the evil of serial murder, no matter how many or few there are. This is humanity's low note, and it makes us wonder why. Consider the case of a sexually motivated serial killer. How did he come to crave murder? And how was he able to turn his fantasies to reality? Be aware that portions of this story are intense. Washington State Penitentiary, the southeast corner of the state at Walla Walla. Nearly 600 men imprisoned here are guilty of murder. Of the 11 sentenced to death, this inmate will likely be executed first.
I kidnapped 3 little boys, a 4-year-old, 10-year-old, and 11-year-old. 2 of them were raped, and then I killed all 3 of them.
Wesley Allen Dodd is what's called an escalating sexual serial killer.
I didn't just go out and start killing. Everything started happening when I was just 13 years old.
Dodd began by exposing himself to younger boys. Each time, charges were dropped.
Well, authorities don't care if I engage in that kind of activity either. Progressed a little bit more. Started asking other kids to pull their pants down. After that arrest, and the charges were dropped, I was in counseling for a short period of time. For only a couple of months. It wasn't required, so I quit going.
But Dodd did not stop committing sex crimes. Richland, Washington, an attempt to entice 2 girls into his car. Charges eventually dropped. Bremerton, Washington, Arrested for offering money to boys for sex. Again, charges dismissed.
See, things kept progressing. I kept getting away with all these crimes while I was going to try to do a little bit more. I was enjoying what I was doing.
More molestings and a rape. In Idaho, Dodd serves only 4 months of a 10-year sentence.
At the time, I was laughing at him. I mean, hey, great, I could do anything I want. Anything.
He kept a lengthy diary as to the types of activities he was performing in order to find his victims. And he would go out day after day or night after night to parks, to schools, to playgrounds, to amusement parks, to movie theaters, looking for the right child at the right moment.
So that was my original reason for killing, was so that they couldn't report what I'd done, who had done it. But I wasn't sure I could kill, so in my mind I had to make that exciting. I had to fantasize about it, and to be able to kill, I had to make that thought exciting. And in a matter of just a couple of weeks, I was able to do that, and I was ready to kill. I wanted to kill.
Why now go to murder? Why did he escalate the violence against his victims from a sexual assault to homicide? That's one of the things we're studying, one of the things we're looking at.
Labor Day weekend, 1989. Wesley Dodd molests 11-year-old Cole Neer while Neer's 10-year-old brother Billy watches, both of them on their knees.
Okay, there's just one more thing I want to do before I let you guys go. I pulled the knife back out of my sock, reached over and stabbed Billy, Neer, the younger one. Got him in the stomach. I didn't see the knife go in. I don't know if I felt more than saw that I'd hit him. I don't know. I knew I'd stabbed him, but wasn't sure exactly where. I knew it was in the stomach area. And then I turned to Cole and started stabbing him before he could get away. I stabbed Cole 3 times. Billy had gotten up and ran. I caught him, stabbed him 2 more times, and as I was stabbing him, as I caught him and stopped him, he told me, "I'm sorry."
Once they've killed their first victim or their second, they feel better, especially if the killing was a good kill. And I hate to use that word, good, but they fulfilled their fantasies as best they could.
I was scared after that. After all that had happened, all planning and fantasies and everything, I can't believe I actually did it. I actually killed somebody. I killed 2 little boys.
I think these people are totally consumed with murder. They're out there searching, looking, feeling, touching, experimenting. And with that much activity involved, how in the world do you have time for anything else in society? You're thinking about murder 24 hours a day.
And I just became obsessed with it at that point. I mean, that is all I thought about. Every minute I was awake, I had dreams about it. At work, that's all I thought about. And it was only 7 weeks after I'd murdered the 2 Neer brothers that I went into Portland, found a 4-year-old boy, kind of off by himself.
The father of that boy is Bob Isley.
Lee and his brother Justin asked if they could go to one of the parks in the area and play, and it was a nice sunny day, and I said sure. It was a Sunday afternoon.
And there was a little boy I figured was maybe 4 or 5 off, kind of by himself. Right away, okay, I'm going to get that little boy. I'm going to get that little 4 or 5-year-old. Parked my car on one side of the school, out of view of all the kids that were playing there. Walked around the end of the building, walked up to this little boy. He was playing on a concrete mound. They call it volcano, I guess. It had steps up one side and a slide down it.
Me and my friends played football for a little while. Kept on checking on my brother so he wouldn't do anything wrong.
Asked him if he wanted to play some games and have some fun. And that sounded like a good idea. He was kind of hesitant about going anywhere with me. Apparently he'd been told, in fact, I found out later his brother had just told him not to talk to strangers just a few minutes earlier.
Like, I checked one time and saw this man walking around. Checked again. He was looking at my brother, checked again. He was walking up the mountain where my brother was.
He wasn't sure about it, but I reached out my hand, and just kind of an automatic response, he reached out and took my hand. And that was it. He went with me.
Checked again, he wasn't there.
He was abducted by a stranger, you know, grabbed from a playground and taken to be used as somebody's play toy.
So I took Lee Isley back to my apartment. This was on October 29th. Immediately had him take his clothes off. Got out my Polaroid camera and took pictures of him in various poses, standing and laying on the bed.
The serial killer has the fantasy, the destructive, aberrant fantasy about how he will victimize people, women, children, things he'll do to cause pain, to cause suffering, things that will cause him sexual and psychological excitement.
Tied him to bed, took a photograph of him tied up, let him loose, told him, okay, now I'm going to teach you how to make love like grown-ups do.
You'll never find serial killers going after people who are more powerful than themselves. They feel outnumbered. They feel outmatched. They're going to attack people who are less powerful.
And I said, well, what if I take you down to Kmart and we'll buy you something to play with and we'll go to McDonald's for dinner? Then would you like to spend the night with me? And I said, okay, yeah, that would be all right. So I just kidnapped him a couple hours earlier, and I take him into a busy Kmart store.
Brought him back, and as the boy was watching TV in his apartment, Mr. Dodd was writing in his diary things like, little does this young boy know that within 12 hours he's going to be dead.
About 3 o'clock or so in the morning, while I was molesting him, I kind of whispered in his ear, I'm going to kill you in the morning. I wasn't sure if he was even awake when I said it, but he kind of mumbled, what? And I repeated it. I said, I'm going to kill you in the morning. And he said, no, you're not. And I said, okay, I won't.
But Dodd had to leave his apartment to go to his job as a shipping clerk.
I thought about tying him up and gagging him and leaving him there while I was at work. And again, the landlady might come in and find him. So I decided, well, I have to do it now. I have to kill him now.
Sexual serial killers kill for an orgasm. Nothing more complex than that.
And with my right hand, I started choking him. As far as I know, he was asleep when I started doing that. He never opened his eyes.
It's this godlike rush of power over life and death. It's playing God with these victims. And it's that thrill, and it's that same thrill that all of these offenders enjoy. It's that decision that they have this control over life and death.
Using the rope, I lifted him up and carried him over to my bedroom closet, pushed the clothes aside, and tied the ends of the rope around the bar in the closet and left him hanging there while I got ready for work.
He photographed all of these activities and kept it in his personal things. It was sort of, you know, very gruesome, you know, to sit and look at a 4-year-old child just hanging like a slab of beef, you know, from the closet. He then went to work, worked full shift, came back and decided that even though rigor mortis was setting in, to have other sexual activities with the child that evening.
Dodd dumped the body and started fantasizing again, writing details in his diary.
I started writing about cannibalism, kidnapping, moving to a different place where I could kidnap kids and keep them and use them for as long as I wanted. Kind of use them as sex slaves.
The downfall of so many of them, and the reason they stop killing when they do, is that they don't know how to make use of their power at a reasonable rate. And so they let it get out of hand.
Dodd's downfall came when he attempted to abduct his next victim from a movie theater bathroom.
By the time I got to the doors of the lobby, he had caught his breath back and he started screaming. He yelled, "Someone help me, he's killing me." He, of course, at that time didn't have any way of knowing that that's exactly what I intended to do.
He got outside with the boy, took the boy to his car and attempted to drive off. The fortunate part was he was having car problems.
Dodd was apprehended just a few blocks from the theater.
I'd have kept on doing it, and the things I would have done would have been even worse than murder.
Could Wesley Allen Dodd have been stopped?
I think so.
What would it have taken?
It would have taken someone to recognize the propensity for violence, and I think it was recognized. But then it would have taken a system, and by the system I mean the courts, the prosecutors, the whole system, to take adequate steps to prevent him from doing this again.
It's really disturbing that he fell through the cracks on at least 2 occasions when he should have had intensive treatment.
The system does not work, and from my point of view, it doesn't even want to.
But we had no reason to believe that he was any significant threat to our community at the time, and obviously we were wrong.
Unlike most serial killers, Dodd claims to feel some remorse.
You look back and realize what you've done. And when you lay down at night and you hear a dying little boy telling you that he's sorry, or a little 4-year-old, no, you're not going to kill me. You think about those just about every night, and it makes you really, really think about what it is you've done.
You know, he feels sorry. Well, you know, it's too late to be sorry. The time to be sorry is before you're in jail, not after you're in. You know, it's easy to say you're sorry after you broke the cookie jar, not before you broke it.
You're still under oath. That oath continues through the entire hearing.
Bob Isley watched as Dodd was convicted of the murders of his son and the Near boys.
As I understand it, there are jurors who heard the evidence in this case who are still undergoing therapy as a result of the evidence that they were asked to hear.
Tremendous waste of little people's lives. It was so undeserving.
To the annoyance of many in the Pacific Northwest, Dodd wrote articles from jail offering advice for children on how to escape sex attacks.
So I want people to know, hey, your kids can protect themselves, even from a killer. Just say no, yell for help, and run away.
Wesley Allen Dodd wanted the system improved so sex offenders could be helped before further harm was done. Dodd didn't live to see that happen.
The last week we've gone over this and over this and over this many times.
A jury said Dodd should be executed. Appeals were filed, but not by the defendant.
You look at that camera there, and you tell the 9 justices of the Supreme Court what you really, really, really want to do.
I want to be executed. I want to waive all appeals.
All appeals.
All appeals.
Dodd had a choice: death by lethal injection or hanging.
Hanging. That's the way I'm going to go. I'm going to hang, because that's the way Lee Isley died. I don't think I deserve a neat, clean, painless little death. No, I mean, that's not the way Lee Isley died. No. Hang me.
Dodd was executed January 1993.
Actually, it's not really that I want to die as much as I know I have to, because I know I won't stop killing.
Not all serial killers are motivated by sexual excitement. Many murder people they know, people they are supposed to be caring for. The term is custodial serial killer, and often they don't get caught until they confess.
I'm in prison for murder. I committed 37 aggravated murders, 7 attempted aggravated murders, and 1 felonious assault.
In the annals of serial murder, Donald Harvey could be called the best of the worst.
He even told me that he had a list that he kept of his victims.
While convicted of 37 murders, Donald Harvey insists he has killed as many as 87 people over 20 years. But he was charged with less than half because of lack of evidence.
How can you keep track of that many?
Well, if you have a stamp collection, you know approximately how many stamps you have, right? So with the murders, I knew approximately how many deaths. I kept record.
Donald Harvey is a custodial serial murderer. While working as a nurse's aide, he killed dozens of patients inside at least 3 different hospitals in Ohio and Kentucky.
He got away with it because he was killing people who were expected to die, people who were in comas, people who were in this facility to die.
Most nurses, you work 5 hours, you gotta go to the bathroom, they want to put their lipstick on, so they're all in the bathroom getting ready to go to lunch, right? So that would give me a chance to move around.
After Harvey's arrest, police found an array of poisons in his house trailer, even the vial he used to bring the poisons to work. Behind a picture frame, police found the list of the victims.
In some cases, he gave them cyanide, which was fairly instantaneous as far as death is concerned. In other cases, he gave them arsenic, and they lingered for many days and suffered.
Harvey had been fired from his job at Cincinnati's VA hospital after he was accused of stealing body parts from the morgue. A gun, a syringe, and books on the occult were also found in his locker. Shortly afterwards, Harvey applied across town at Drake Hospital, a county-operated long-term care facility.
He was hired, but no one ever checked with the VA hospital to find out what his performance had been or the reasons that he had left the VA hospital.
The killer stalked on the night shift.
And he locked his eyes in with mine when I put the cyanide into his G2. And he looked straight at me. Whether it was, he knew I had done something wrong, or it was shock, he knew something, he was dying. But it was only for maybe 2 seconds, and then it was over with.
Imagine being in a bed, being aware of your environment, being unable to tell anyone, to ask anyone for help, and seeing this man come in repeatedly and administer something to you that you don't know what it is, but you know that it is seriously harming you, and being forced to live through that and eventually die.
Yes, a lot of people died on the floor. Yes, he found some people dead. But no one ever, and to this day, has ever seen Donald Harvey do anything in terms of homicide. Ever.
No one seems like a serial killer when met on the street. None of them do. And that's because they do not have what we would all wish they had, which is the sign of Cain on their forehead, so that we could run the other way.
People liked Donald Harvey, even the relatives of his victims.
Whenever I came in, he'd always say, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Kendrick. How are you today? Your husband's back there. He's waiting on you."
Izella and Claiborne Kendrick had been married for 47 years. Mr. Kendrick, a lawyer, suffered from a series of strokes. Mrs. Kendrick visited her husband every day.
I had not been on vacation, and my sister had asked me to go to Hawaii with her. And I said yes, no, and I talked with the doctor, should I leave my husband for a whole week? And I talked with the head nurse, and they all said, go, go, go.
I waited till she come back before I killed him, because I didn't want to mess up her vacation by having her husband die.
What he had done with Mr. Kendrick, as he had done with many of these cases, he had taken a small amount of cyanide, mixed it with water, placed it in a syringe, and injected that material into a G tube. Mr. Kendrick died almost immediately from that injection.
It was almost unbelievable when they said Donald Harvey was the one that did it. I was in complete shock because he would have been the last one I would ever have thought.
A lot of these people can be very likable people. You can see how they could draw victims into their spider web because they can be very charming people.
Harvey claims he was acting out of rage from his past. He says he was sexually abused as a youngster by family and a neighbor.
I always felt the rush after they would be finished with me. I was out of their, I was no longer tied down. The freedom that I felt, and I looked at that I was releasing them from that bondage that would hold them down till they died.
It's very hard to see a clear sexual motive in most of Harvey's murders. I would suggest that power, domination, the sense of being able to get away with murder repeatedly, the sense of superiority to the world, goes a long way to accounting for crimes for that.
You don't become a serial killer overnight. There's a process. A lot of serial killers will go in and they'll practice killing.
I worked with pathologists, and they have all kinds of books on deaths, what to look for, forensic pathology. And it's just full of little tidbits. Just practice, I guess.
But in the hospital, private suspicions were being raised.
The nickname that he got was the Angel of Death. And he was given that nickname of the Angel of Death by the staff members because he was always the one to come in and say, I was just with Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so and they're dead.
I think there were some deep-seated suspicions by members of that staff who went to a supervisor nurse and expressed this concern. The supervisor nurse, I think, and I think she has to live with this the rest of her life, instructed these nurses to keep their mouths shut, that the hospital could be sued for this type of talk.
It was progression. The longer he was doing it, the more skilled he was at it, and harder hence it was to catch him. And until the end, where he made a very big mistake.
The last one I killed, I thought that day, well, I think I made a boo-boo. I should have went the other way. Should have injected it into an IV instead of giving it to him in his gastric tube. And that was my downfall.
John Powell was recovering from a motorcycle accident. Most of the patients Harvey killed were never autopsied, but under Ohio law, the death of anyone in a motor accident must be reported to the coroner's office.
He had severe brain damage from the motorcycle accident. He had very severe pneumonia and everything else that goes with it. The unusual aspect was that his stomach smelled like cyanide.
At that point, lie detector tests were administered to staff of the hospital. Donald Harvey missed his first one. When he rescheduled, they immediately suspected when he missed his first one there was a problem. He came in, they questioned him, and he confessed to the homicide of John Powell.
Harvey knew the possibilities.
If they come up with one piece of evidence, then John Powell, if whether they had anything on me at Drake or not, then John Powell would become a death penalty case anyway. So it's like Price is Right. You got door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. And I chose door number 1.
You chose life.
Yeah, chose life.
The prosecutors met Harvey's demand not to seek the death penalty in exchange for a confession to any other killings.
One of the most incredible narrations I've ever heard to this day. The detail to which he remembered these homicides. It was an incredible story. And frankly, we didn't believe him at first.
After exhuming some of the victims, police found arsenic, confirming Harvey's murder confessions.
We had no case until we had the confession. We still, if you remove the confession from the Donald Harvey, State of Ohio versus Donald Harvey, you take that confession out, we have no case against Donald Harvey.
Only thing I say to him is why? Why? What did you call yourself doing?
Well, I didn't have a right to take any of their lives away, but I did. I chose to play the judge, the jury, the prosecutor, the hangman, whatever you want to call me.
By law, he's eligible for parole, I think, when he's 94 or 95 years old. But I think we can pretty much rest assured he's not going to get out. Not if this office has anything to do about it.
They say, you know, you're molded, and I think I was like a bad car. This way I look at it, right? Sometimes you get a lemon, and sometimes you get a good one. I was just the lemon.
Serial murderers come in all varieties, short and tall, black and white, men and women. While their motivations and backgrounds can be very different, they are linked by a quality most of us could not comprehend: an affinity, a desire to commit multiple murder.
Most of the time they were sleeping. like the 3 that I was charged with and I'm doing time with now, they was sleeping when I strangled them.
Still, the question remains, what makes them kill? This is Blountstown, Florida, a rural panhandle community where everybody tends to know everybody else. It's also the home of Christine Falling, a babysitter who became a serial killer. How many children did you kill?
There was 6 altogether. I was only charged with 3 of them.
I'm not responsible. I didn't teach her to kill.
Dolly Falling adopted Christine along with her sister when she was given up by her natural mother at the age of 3.
I knew what I done. I knew that I whipped their butts when they done wrong. When I caught them doing wrong, I'd get me a belt, and when I got through with them, they would be glad for me to turn them loose.
Christine says her adoptive father, Jesse Falling, abused his daughters, especially her sister.
At first, I thought he was just hitting her with the belt, so I went and creeped down the hallway and opened the bedroom door, and I seen him raping her. And so I run back in the kitchen. I forgot about being quiet. I run back into the living room and went to the kitchen. And I was just tall enough I could hit the bottom of the phone and get the receiver that had the dial thing on its receiver. And I was trying to call the cops. And next thing I know, this cord wrapped around my neck.
Your husband never abused her in any way?
No, he did not, because I lived in my home. I knew what went on in my home. And anybody says it, Jesse Falling abused them children, is a liar. I don't care who they are.
Christine was also developing a temper of her own.
I was pretty mean when I was growing up.
She choked a cat one time because she was angry at her mother. She threw the same cat across the room because she was mad or frustrated with someone.
I always consider myself, and still do, what you would consider the black sheep of the family.
She was in the Blountstown Hospital, I think, 54 times in a year for all sorts of complaints.
Many of the complaints were made up. Nonetheless, Christine was headed down a path of self-destruction. She was gaining weight rapidly, abusing drugs and alcohol. She dropped out of school. What happened?
She quit.
Why
She wanted to go over yonder to her mother. That was it. About 14 years old, she just wanted to go to her mother. And she went to her mother, and when she got up over there, completely everything went wrong.
Falling's biological father was unable to provide support. Her natural mother was running a house of prostitution.
My mother had wanted me to go to bed with one of the businessmen that was at the house, and I told her no. And she picked up a board, a 2x4 board in the kitchen, and hit me upside the head with it. And she not once come to the hospital to see me. She not once even checked on me to see if I was still alive.
I think it all happened when her brain was knocked loose, out. That's what I think went wrong. I truly believe when she was hit on the head with that 2x4, it just messed up her thinking.
After I was hit in the head with the board with my real mother, that's when I started having grandma epileptic seizures.
The serial killers represent the epitome of a developmental process gone wrong.
Clinical psychologist Ken McGidd believes a failure to bond with parents at an early age, along with a genetic predisposition, may be building blocks for a serial killer.
So the baby says, pre-verbally, I'll never be in this position again, ever to experience this kind of pain. And the only way to do that is to never be vulnerable. So I'll always be in control, I'll always be vigilant, and I will do unto others before they do unto me.
Christine Falling began babysitting to earn some money.
This woman babysat for hundreds of children ever since she was 13. She was a terrific babysitter 99% of the time. It's a little like the nursery rhyme, when she was good, she was very, very good, and when she was bad, she was horrid.
Her first victim was 2-year-old Cassidy Muffin Johnson.
Cassidy had come into the room where I was at, which it was like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. She had come, got in the bed with me, and what happened after that, your guess as good as mine, I'm not sure.
First child, she said she just automatically moved her hands from the waist to the neck. And as she was looking the child in the face. She saw this poor child change from red to purple, and she kept choking this child until it didn't twitch anymore.
It's like, I can't really say what actually caused it those days, or what. I don't know if it was the kid was crying and got on my nerves. I just don't know.
I think the fourth child was actually her step-niece. She was in the car with the child's mother. The child's mother, her stepsister, went into a store. She strangled the child right there in the car. And when the mother came out, they drove down the street, and the mother noticed the child was not moving and discovered she was dead.
It was just like the babies took up their time that they normally had spent with me, and I guess I started resenting that. And when that resentment come in, that's when I guess, got the idea of, well, maybe I'll take something away from them since they want to take something away from me.
Officials were baffled. Medical examiners said the deaths were due to sudden infant death syndrome or other ailments.
She could have been caught earlier on if people had looked and paid attention to what was happening. She killed those children. She had a need to kill. She felt she had a need to kill. And she did not ever understand her need to kill.
Then a fifth infant, Travis Coleman, died in Christine Falling's care.
People were real concerned about these children dying, and all of them dying in her presence, you know, her being the babysitter.
The only part that I really enjoyed is watching cops and medical examiners run around trying to figure out what's going on, what's happening.
Forensic pathologist Joseph Sapala, called in by the sheriff, thought the deaths were poorly investigated.
Falling got away with it for so long because she knew that the autopsies that were being performed were not thorough. And so in her mind, she was playing a game of try to catch me if you can.
Falling ultimately confessed to Sheriff Smith.
She said, I killed him, and she discussed with me the fact that how she killed each one of them, she could just, hold each one of them a certain way and cut the breath off and kill them like that.
When she was being sentenced that day, they said, "What did you do to them children?" She said, "I put my hands around their neck and choked them to death." That's what she said.
Was
she
she trying to get back at someone, do you think? Was
no,
she emulating?
No, She was looking for that. She was thinking in her silly mind that it was going to make her famous. She thought she'd get publicity enough that she'd be well known. And I guess that's what she wanted. Well, if she's got that, she's different from me. She's different from me.
Not everybody has the same coping mechanisms to deal with stress. I deal with stress by going out and going for a run. I know serial killers who go out and kill people, and that's how they deal with their stress.
Why do you think you did it?
Like I said, I can speculate. That's all I can do. It could have been because of jealousy. It could have been anger. I don't know. I guess that's something no one will ever know because apparently I don't want to know.
Christine Falling could get out of prison as early as the year 2007, when her mandatory 25-year sentence concludes. But there is considerable concern whether she is ready for the outside world.
That's what I was previously struck with when I first talked to her, Mr. Rolfe. She still wants to go back to babysitting.
It's been kind of a mystery to me as much as it has to anyone else as to why this happened, because I love kids to death.
What do we need to know? Well, we need to know why they kill. I don't think we know.
We know nothing. We have speculations, we have theories, we have all of these wonderful, nice, neat packages, but they still don't tell us how can we find one of these people before they kill someone.
There seem to be as many theories as there are killers. First, abuse, as seen in the case of child killer Christine Falling, abuse at a young age.
I think the family is where it all really begins. You don't find healthy, emotionally adjusted children becoming serial killers as adults.
Serial killers like Ted Bundy and others not only were not cuddled when they were young, but probably were abused or neglected in addition to some genetic predispositions that occurred in their lives.
We know the serial murderer has no emotional attachment to any human being. None. Otherwise, he would not be capable of doing what he's doing.
Okay. The self-confessed killer of 87 people, Donald Harvey, links sexual abuse in his childhood to later crimes.
By being abused by the uncle and the neighbor man, I think contributed 20% to me being a serial killer. I think there was something probably messed up in me mentally, or it messed me up mentally.
And everybody says abuse. Oh, I'm sick of hearing about abuse. I don't want to hear about abuse in relation to all you're doing is making excuses for these people. The word abuse does not begin to cover the experience of these people. The more dreadful the things that they do, the more grotesque the way they have been treated.
Regrettably, we may never know the truth about that issue because the theory was made popular to the extent that every sex offender in American prisons and mental hospitals knew the theory before anybody had done a decent study. And now a decent study can't be done because every offender knows that the way to get sympathy from an interviewer is to talk about your own sexual abuse.
Wesley Allen Dodd molested dozens of children and murdered 3 young boys, yet
I was never abused. I was never sexually abused. I was never physically abused. I wasn't neglected. The family had plenty of money, owned our own house, 2 cars, a trailer. I had a happy childhood.
They enjoy it. It's as simple as that.
It's kind of hard for a social scientist to use the word evil and not be pilloried by his colleagues, but it's simply another way of looking at the same phenomena.
You can see that there's a scarring in the white matter in the left frontal lobe.
however, some doctors look for medical reasons. Georgetown University neurologist Jonathan Pincus insists brain damage contributes to violence.
And to think that brain damage does not influence behavior is requires a leap of faith that I'm not willing to take.
Many serial killers use head trauma as part of their defense. Bobby Joe Long, the killer of 10 women, blames a motorcycle accident for his streak of violence.
Mainly the thing to me is his head injuries, because they've told us his brain's damaged, that the frontal part of his brain is damaged.
Many others have had the same history, the same brain damage, if you will, and I put that in quotes, and they don't go on to commit any crimes of violence.
So the question is, nurture or nature? Are the killers born this way, or do they learn how to kill? That depends on your professional perspective. Dr. Park Dietz, who has examined many serial killers, including Jeffrey Dahmer, thinks they learn to enjoy murder.
The beliefs that motivate a man like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy are not delusional beliefs. They're personal preferences, a preference for what kinds of things are sexually stimulating. And that's learned in the same way that men become breast men or leg men, by exposure during critical periods of development.
It's a psychiatrist washing his hands of the case.
Did the defendant, Jeffrey L. Dahmer, have a mental disease?
When serial killers are arrested, the first words from the community are usually, "He's crazy." But are these killers truly insane?
The law says they're not. The medical, psychiatric, psychological literature said that they must be.
Well, this is an argument that circles on itself because it's difficult to understand how individuals could do that, so it's very easy to say they must be insane or must be suffering from some mental disorder. But it's also a way of eliminating, or I should say refusing to look at the outer limits of human freedom and even human evil, if you will.
What they do is crazy, but these people who are doing it are not crazy. They understand what they're doing is wrong, but they are so far into their fantasies, in the cycle of fantasies, that it just keeps them going over and over and over again.
I see the serial killer and the severe psychopathic personality disorder as being the AIDS of the mental health community. That is, we don't have a cure for those people.
My opinion, the truth is there are no experts today.
There are also many theories about the people with theories.
It's kind of like the four blind men and the elephant. Everybody's got a piece of it and describes it differently.
They're the experts, right?
Are they?
Hell, they've never caught one. They've never gone to a crime scene. They've never seen his product. They've never gone out there and smelled the blood. They've never seen the viciousness of it.
You know, everyone that ever sees someone that kills a lot of people, they all become experts. If one psychologist sees a serial killer, then suddenly he can write a book and he's got all the answers. He may never see another one again.
While the names of serial killers are familiar to all of us, the victims are almost always anonymous. What do we know about the victims? Do murder victims have traits that allow them to become victims? Serial killers find their victims almost anytime, anywhere. For example, this Portland, Oregon parking garage, 1969.
Well, I crossed the street and I came downstairs, and it was April. It was a sunshiny day. There were about 10,000.
Sharon Wood was not alert to begin with. Experts say the killers innately seemed to know. She was suffering from an ear infection and a hangover. Yet Wood could sense someone in the shadows. What happened?
He tapped me on the shoulder. Right about that time, just as I'm about here, he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, ma'am. And I went to turn around expecting, I didn't know what, but I didn't expect to see a gun. And he had the gun pointed at me and he said, if you don't scream, I won't shoot you.
Serial killers do not attack weightlifters, bodybuilders. They go after people who are powerless or appear to be powerless.
The man about to drag Wood away was Jerome Brudos, a sadistic serial killer with a fetish for high-heel shoes, which Wood was wearing that day. He killed at least 3 other women using torture devices.
What's so alarmingly remarkable, that's just so sad, is how expendable his victims are. They're nothing more than a Q-tip, lead out of a pencil, a battery that when it's used, you just throw it away.
The victims of serial murder tend to be the vulnerable: women, children, the homeless, prostitutes, hitchhikers, the poor.
First of all, it says something just about expediency for the murderer. These are people who the culture itself considers throwaway people.
I refer to the victims of serial killers as the less dead, primarily because they were less alive when they were alive, because they're, for the most part, throwaway groups in our society.
Christine Folling was able to avoid detection, even though she babysat for 5 children who died while in her hands.
All these children were probably from poor backgrounds. Probably that had a lot to do with the scale of the investigation.
And then there was Dahmer.
He appeared to be a calm, neatly dressed, clean-shaven.
He selected minorities for victims. Again, little sympathy, even from the police who could have stopped him.
This butt-naked young boy or man or whatever, he's butt-naked, he's been beaten up real bad, and he fell out, and people are trying to help him stand. He can't stand. He's butt-naked, he has no clothes on, he is very hurt.
Is he awake?
Yeah, he ain't awake. They trying to get him to walk, but he can't walk straight. He can't even see straight.
You know, nobody was paying attention to all the men of color that were disappearing. If it had been all, white boys in Huntington or whatever, somebody would have been paying attention.
Intoxicated Asian naked male was returned to his sober boyfriend.
So class and racism covers up for these killers. Society aids them in some ways.
My name is Rita Isbell, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan. I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, motherfucker. I hate you. This is out of control. Don't fuck with me, Jeffrey. I kill you. God damn it. Look at me, motherfucker. I kill you.
Punch your knee,
Let me kill you.
Do you remember the victims? Remember seeing the victims? What happened to the victims? We don't care about the victims. And I think that reflects our society.
We don't think about the graves and the families that have survived and the terrible things that they have to go through for the rest of their lives.
What about me? What about us? What about us, the survivors? You know, why do they have to make, it's almost like they make him look like a hero.
Why don't we have a monument to all the survivors or the victims? Why don't we rename our city streets after the women who both survived and who didn't survive?
5915 West Crestfield.
But some feel the victim can't escape all responsibility. In the Dahmer case, men accepted a stranger's invitation or money to go back to an apartment for sex.
Because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point.
Well, there's a part of that affair that really hasn't been spoken of, and partly because no one, of course, wishes to point toward the victims of having any complicity in this, and they don't morally. But I think it would be hard to escape noticing when we dispassionately look at how he acquired his victims.
But did Ted Bundy's victims have any complicity? Bundy's charm was legendary. He often acquired his victims by asking for help.
And most of us want to trust people. We want to trust people. So someone comes up to us in a shopping mall and with a broken arm and says, gee, would you please help me carry my books to my car? Or, little boy, I've lost my puppy over here in the woods. Would you help me find him? How can you say no to that? Most people are going to say yes.
For the general public, the task isn't spotting serial killers. The task is spotting irresponsible people.
Sharon Wood in the basement of the parking garage had no warning, no opportunity to avoid Brudos.
And I looked in his eyes, and I didn't have a purse. I knew it wasn't anything about theft. And so I just decided I didn't want to go. And so I started backing up, and I started screaming. And I backed up, and he came towards me, and he put his arm around me to shut my mouth. And what happened next, I don't know how it happened, but I bit his thumb, and my jaw locked on his thumb, and I had, what I learned later, I didn't know it then, was fear paralysis. And so I bit his thumb so hard that my jaw locked, and we started going around in a circle, and we were struggling, and I couldn't let loose, and he wanted me to let loose. And I had long hair then, and he bent me, he used my hair as a fulcrum, and he bent me over backwards, you know, and I still have his, literally he was my captive. And he bent me over backwards right about there, and he started beating my head on the concrete, and I started to lose consciousness, and then my jaw relaxed, and he pulled his thumb out.
She did the right thing. She did the right thing at that moment. It was daylight. He was there. He had a gun, the gun that is right here in this box, and she reacted very quickly and smartly. Now, that's not the advice that I'm giving to everybody, because it's an individual, personal thing as to what to do.
You have to break the control, like Sharon Wood did by biting Jerry Brudos' thumb. You've got to break the control.
The women who acted afraid, or children who acted afraid, they were part of that domination. They were being controlled, and so they were killed.
I tend to call it falling in death.
That ability of the killer to recognize the vulnerable face of a potential victim.
That there's something in a look. It's not a seductive look, it's not an angry look, it's a nothing look. It's just something that captures both of those individuals.
This woman did not escape from Jerome Brudos.
He took a photograph of her. He loved to photograph his victims. And he told me that this was 5 minutes before she died. Just as flat as I've told you. And you will look at her and she has somewhat of a smile on her face. And he killed her. It's fear paralysis.
Brudos did not succeed with Sharon Wood, running away after she bit his thumb. He is now Oregon's longest-serving inmate.
Well, I didn't know why I survived, and it took me a lot of years, and I'm still not certain of that answer. You know, why some people survive and why others don't.
Of course, you have to put this into context and realize that the chances anywhere of falling victim to a serial murderer are very small. They're far smaller than, for instance, the chance of dying in a road accident.
But if you're targeted by a serial killer, the odds of survival are very small.
And I don't understand really what happened to him. I really don't. And I don't understand what happened down here that day, but
but I know I have a life that I wouldn't have had, and I have kids that I wouldn't have had, and who could explain some of those mysteries, you know?
Serial murder is the subject of dozens of films and made-for-TV movies. There's even a serial killing board game. Is our fascination with these killers a healthy outlet for our worst fears, or something more insidious? Does popular culture's obsession with serial murder help create the monsters? He is perhaps the most famous serial killer of recent times. No, it's not Harvey, Bundy, or Dahmer. It's Lecter, Dr. Hannibal Lecter.
Good morning. I think the media and the news and the entertainment media have created the idea of what a serial killer is, and believe me, he is not Hannibal Lecter.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
I went to see Silence of the Lambs and came out appalled.
To represent Hannibal Lecter as the classic sociopath or psychopath just threw us back about 100 years in our understanding.
Most serial killers keep some sort of trophies from their victims.
I didn't.
No. No, you ate yours.
Always off to have dinner, you know. He's going to go kill somebody and eat him. And we're going, oh, that's, you know, we're kind of laughing about it. That is not the message we need to be giving people.
Even while behind bars, these killers are out doing business. They are being packaged and sold in magazines, movies, books, and even trading cards.
The nature of modern mass society is that a substantial industry is created around any serial killer.
Anne Rule capitalized on her real-life experience as a friend of Ted Bundy to be a successful true crime author.
I think the fascination isn't that most people want to know about the blood and gore, and certainly there is plenty of that. They want to know why. What spawned this kind of killer?
Journalist Jack Olson has written several books on crime and serial murder. His explanation for the rise in the public's fascination? Crime is affecting more people.
That's the new ingredient that's making this a growth industry. I just wish that it would be a responsible growth industry.
Which leads us to the lair of Boneyard Press. This publisher sketched a controversial comic book starring Jeffrey Dahmer.
It's something you can't get anywhere else. I mean, if you like the truth, if you like something a little different, something a little bit more fresh, a little bit more bloody, we've got the meat.
I would say that, especially in our own time, the serial killer has become what I would call a postmodern performance artist.
That discussed the relatives of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims. They sued to block publication of the Dahmer comic book.
The way I see it is my book does not breed serial killers. My books do not make killers. Killers are created from bad homes, abusive parents, no parents. That's where monsters come from.
David Berkowitz was walked into police headquarters, giving everyone a first look at the man police say did all the shootings.
The surest route to celebrity in modern America, the easiest way to propel yourself from being, say, an anonymous postal clerk like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, to an international celebrity who holds press conferences, who is to become a renowned serial killer.
Richard, you gonna let them do this to you? Where's the witness? You gonna let them kill you?
All you got to do is watch them. They're enjoying themselves because the press is giving them the attention they want.
See you later, Rich.
It's become routine for a serial murderer to get treatment, a film treatment.
What about my money? You said you was going to pay me before.
In this case, the story of Eileen Wuornos, serial killer.
Come on over here, baby. Come on. Come on. Come on.
I think that's why murder is so popular. It sells. Murder sells, just like sex sells.
Please, stop.
The movie studios of Hollywood have been called the Dream Factory, but do gory slasher films help create the ultimate nightmare, the serial killer?
We're doing everything we can to manufacture them. We have a society that does what it can to prevent the development of conscience, to prevent the development of morals, to link sexuality with violence.
Please, God.
This is God.
I don't think I am doing something terrible.
Film director Wes Craven created Freddy Krueger of Nightmare on Elm Street fame.
It's like the ugly face wants to break the mirror. You know, it's not coming from films. Films are reflecting what's in the culture at large.
Hey, Nancy. No running in the hallway.
I think about like little kids who think Freddy Krueger, The Nightmare on Elm Street, is great. Freddy is a child molester and murderer, but children have made him into a cult figure.
I think people are attracted to films where people kill each other, to put it very bluntly, because one of the things that people are at their core, not in their civilized exterior, but at their core afraid of, is that somebody's going to kill them.
I think these filmmakers are drawn to the subject of murder because they perceive, quite interestingly, that their own role as filmmakers, where they're manipulating their audience's fantasies, is in a way very similar to that of the killer, which kind of preys on the fears of the public.
I literally can't imagine a better way to produce such people than to use the formula that's used for such a large number of films today. Of having a scene that arouses every red-blooded American boy and then mutilating the woman.
I don't think that you're going to solve the problems of society by stopping its art forms. You know, I just think it's as simple as that. It's scapegoatism.
If there were responsible persons in the media, they would be perfectly free to do the right thing. And the right thing would be to have a 5-minute cooling off period between scenes that generate erection in young males and the slaughter and mutilation of women or children.
If that were the case, I think we'd have a lot more serial murderers than we have now. Because this generation of children and the generation prior were exposed to violent, quote-unquote, horror films or Freddy films or Halloween or whatever.
What we call gornography, you know, really where they put sex and violence as closely together as possible. Yeah, I think there needs to be a cooling off of the depiction of violence.
What TV producers and book publishers are going to produce, that's called the First Amendment. You know, maybe it would be nice if we did that, but when did anybody in America ever do anything nice when it would cost them money?
First Amendment rights figure in the fuss over serial killer trading cards. They are part of a true crime card series. Several cities have passed ineffectual resolutions deploring the cards.
Yeah, we're creating anti-heroes is what we're creating. Certainly, people who are put on trading cards are looked at as anti-heroes.
Eclipse Books points out that there are also cards of FBI agents and police officers inside.
Why don't they have victim cards? You know, we live in a free enterprise society and anybody can do anything they want. You know, they're making big bucks off of killers.
This is sheer capitalism. This is to make a quick buck at the expense of our society. This is a very, very sad commentary on who we are.
But despite the success of films and books on serial murder, the obsession may be fading.
I think that this voluminous amount of material on killing and serial killing is going to make people get a little bit bored with the subject.
We'll probably have 2 more Silence of the Lambs, where Dr. Lecter is even more brilliant than he was before. Hopefully we won't have more than that.
Maybe he will eat an author next time.
Well, not this one.
They have torn down a Milwaukee apartment building where Jeffrey Dahmer killed most of his victims.
I know society will never be able to forgive me. I know the families of the victims will never be able to forgive me for what I have done.
The crowds are gone. Grass and flowers will soon grow on the spot where Dahmer dismembered his victims. One more gruesome case closed, but others have yet to open, with new challenges for those who track the killers.
I more or less put myself in prison. I mean, if I had never confessed, they probably never would have figured it out.
Women are going to become more involved in classic forms of serial killing that meet the definition. I see younger victims. I see younger killers.
At the moment, the U.S. leads in the number of serial killers per capita, and I think that will continue for some period of time. But I would expect for England and Japan to catch up before too long.
We don't have the commitment from the people that hold the purse strings to be able to investigate these type of cases for any long period of time. And unfortunately, that's what we're faced with.
It will be light years before we ever get to a point where we have a serial killer in case that suddenly appeared and we get them the next day. I mean, that's just not going to happen. It's not like domestic killing. The chance of any one person encountering a serial killer is really very, very small.
This ain't funny, okay? If I have to grant, they say I'm a sociopath. I don't know, maybe it's my personality, my makeup, I don't know.
Am I cured? Hardly. I would say that as long as I stay away from children, I'll be okay.
It's time for a re-examination, and a very careful one at that, at the way in which we rear our children.
We must do something about child abuse, that's clear. We must do something about the factors that give rise to brain damage.
To start to identify some type of characteristic, whether it's a biological marker, a genetic marker, an environmental marker, that we can say, this is a high-risk individual.
We're going to have many more serial killers before people will say, well, let's do something about this. The time is now. In fact, it may be too late to prevent many of them already.
There's another thing, death penalty is not a deterrent. I knew it could happen. I knew I would probably get the death penalty if I was ever caught. I didn't care. I mean, death means nothing to me. Other than no more worries, nothing else to worry about, no more court battles are over. It's all over.
The lore of serial murder dates back to the time of the vampires and werewolves. It is handed down in horror stories of Jekyll and Hyde and Hannibal Lecter. Rather than being vilified, they're glorified. Now, even the New York Times has taken to calling serial killers popular culture's favorite villain of the 90s. In reality, there is no glory. Their work is grim. Their impact great on the communities where they strike, though there are fewer than the FBI has claimed. Even after thousands of hours of investigation and analysis, the best police minds are often at a loss, often no closer than the ancient vampire trackers to finding answers, to predicting serial killers, to preventing that first murder. For CNN Special Reports, I'm Richard Roth.